Welcome, everybody. Welcome, everybody. Hey, it's the afternoon. We've got to have a lot of energy because there's only 2 more sessions until we get ready for the aircraft carrier tonight. So enjoy this next little time to yourselves. Managing cloud is hard. Managing cloud and on-prem is even harder. And so we're going to hear in this next talk one I'm very excited about. And we're going to hear from Maneesha Asundi, who is a Senior Principal IT Product Manager at Mr. Cooper, and Jon Thompson, the CTO of Virtasant, talking about FinOps across public cloud and on-prem. Please welcome them. Please.
Welcome home, y'all, and a big hearty Dallas welcome to all of you, and a very hearty namaste from the bottom of my heart. Thank you for joining us on our session on FinOps. Can we use FinOps on-prem? Henry Ford once said, whether you think you can or can't, you're right. And today here we are discussing, can we use FinOps on-prem? So guess what? Whether you think you can or cannot, you're right. Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Maneesha Asundi, and in my squiggly career of spanning over 25 years, I've come into this transformational leadership role where I help organizations through their digital journeys as they modernize their tech stack. And I've been blessed to work across many different industries, cut across many different departments. So it's kind of given me a holistic view of how business operations work. And if I was to do a yardstick of my measure of success throughout wherever I go, because I've been in consulting for the longest time, currently I'm at Mr. Cooper, but before that I was an independent consultant, I would do 2 measures of success. One is, did it help people take accountability? Second one, to embrace change joyfully. You heard earlier in the morning session, in the keynote speaker, where JR said, change is constant, right? So you might as well adopt to this change. So I help people adopt to change, but embrace change joyfully. Don't just endure it, embrace it. So I help people go from the FOMO, fear of missing out, to the joys of missing out, because change can be really welcome. And on a personal side, I'm also a meetup organizer for the Dallas region. So I love to see our Dallas folks over here. Big shout out to you. And I'm very active in the special interest group for women in FinOps. So shout out to all the women who've showed up. My message to you is #showup and #takeup_space. And if there is one quote that I love to live by, it is, quality of life does not depend on the answers that are revealed, but questions that are asked. So we have to learn to ask better questions. With that, Jon.
Thank you, Maneesha. So hi everyone, I'm Jon Thompson. I'm from London in the UK, and I'm the CTO at Virtasant. For those who aren't familiar with us, Virtasant's a cloud services company. We work with a wide range of customers, from startups all the way through to some of the largest organizations in the world. We've been active in the FinOps space for a while, working with the foundation since 2020. And if you want to see more about our FinOps offering, the stands outside there. On a personal note, I'm a mathematician by education. If anyone came to the session that I presented last year with Lee from NVIDIA, you might remember I managed to squeeze some equations into the slides. You'll be glad to know no equations today. I'm a developer by experience. Wrote my first code at the age of 5 on a Tandy TRS-80, which does age me a bit. And I guess if you ask my team, they'd probably tell you my code still looks like a 5-year-old wrote it. For 20-odd years, I worked in trading technology on Wall Street, and that's where I kind of had my first accidental experience of what I guess we'd called FinOps today, and I'll talk a bit more about that later on. And then the past 10 years, I've been working for 100% remote companies focused on the cloud.
So as we go through our topic of discussion, of course, we're going to explore the dynamics and look at a high-level comparison of being on cloud and being on-prem. But we're going to find a common thread so that we know how to operate, regardless of where our apps are hosted. James Clear, in his book, Atomic Habits, he says that we do not rise to the level of the goals, but we fall to the level of the systems. And systems, in this case, is that FinOps framework. Without a system, we just fall flat, and we need this framework. We need a system of operation because it provides a structure, it provides clarity, it provides guidance, it provides the guardrails, and it also helps us streamline our operations. So we're going to explore in this journey, take the FinOps foundation, take the FinOps framework, and pick and choose which of these capabilities can be crossed over. You know how it works on the cloud. Can we explore it and use it on-prem? Yeah. So this is just a high-level overview. We're not going to go into detail of every single aspect. You already know the on-prem and cloud. But because some of us are on-prem, some of us are hybrid, and some of us may be on the cloud already, somewhere on the cloud journey, this is just a high-level overview. And I want everybody to read in between the lines. John and I are not resident experts on any of these components that we've listed. So if you need to double-click, for example, on compliance, on security, on the cost factor, you have resident in-house experts who can take it to the next level and help you with your deep dives. So we don't claim expertise, and that's just a disclaimer.
Yeah, thanks, Maneesha. And we're not going to talk through all of these in detail, but there are a couple we wanted to call out. Firstly, if we think about scalability, flexibility, and reliability. So one of the key benefits of the cloud is you can scale up and down at the drop of a hat. On-prem, it was a lot harder. I had to provision upfront, and then I was stuck with it, whether I used it or not. For many years, I worked in equities trading technology, and I remember there, we used to test to 3 times the previous historical peak. And as you can imagine, trading volumes vary massively. Stock market crash, you get such high volumes. So that peak day was probably 10 times a typical day. So if you put that together, I said I wasn't going to do any maths, but here we go. You're looking at a typical day, maybe you've got 30 times the capacity that you actually need. Add in DR. We want to be able to run at that level if we lose the data center. So now we're running at 60 times what we're actually using on a typical day. Whereas in the cloud, in theory, I can pay for just what I'm using on a given day. And the caveats to that are probably worth a session in their own right, so I won't dig into those, but I'm sure people are very familiar with them. But on the flip side of that, from a management point of view, on-prem was a whole load easier. If I've got that variability in the cloud of going from sort of 1 up to 10 or 30, how do I predict what I'm actually going to spend? On-prem, I just made an upfront decision. It was worth that cost, and then it's going to be the same day in, day out. And so that's kind of a sneak peek into what we'll talk about soon, about the differences between managing on-prem and in the data center.
Yeah. And so when we look at the cost model, right, you will hear these terms, CapEx, OpEx. Again, we are not the resident experts, so if you have questions on taxing, on accounting, please refer to your in-house experts for that. But on-prem expenses are considered to be capital expenditure, and the cloud expenses are operating expenditure, and hence OpEx. The essential difference between these two is, for your CapEx, you make the initial investment upfront, you pay it one time, and these costs are amortized over time. So you do not take the deductions in the same year that you incurred the cost. But on the OpEx side, it's a pay-as-you-go model. You don't have those upfront costs, and it's a subscription model. So you just pay for the services that you use, and you can deduct for those expenses in the same year that you incurred the cost, or the same time period. And the other distinguishing factor is on your regulatory requirements. You own the assets. You're responsible for making sure that it is compliant with your security and regulatory requirements. Versus if you're leaning on the third service provider, the cloud service provider, it's their responsibility. And so it's not shirking the responsibility, but be aware of your penalties, because they will hit you hard if you own the when you own the equipment.
Thanks, Maneesha. And a couple of other things thinking about the cost model. Maneesha mentioned there cloud OpEx, and that's how most people tend to think of it. But actually, most people's cloud spend, maybe 50% plus, is on compute, virtual machines. And hopefully, we've all studied FinOps, so hopefully we've got good coverage with savings plans and reservations. Now, if you pay for those all up front, that's actually CapEx. So potentially a lot of people actually have a large chunk of their cloud spend is actually CapEx. So that's the first thing I want to call out. Second one is if we think about cost transparency. So in the cloud, you've probably got more detail than you can cope with. You've got your CUR and equivalent billing files with every bit of detail, and that's kind of it. There aren't any hidden surprises. On-prem, it's kind of hard to get a fully loaded cost. Sure, you know what the machines cost you. Okay, you've got to worry about depreciation. What about the power, the cooling, the data center staff? What about that new data center you're going to need to build in a year's time because you run out of capacity and maybe you want to put some charge against that? So yeah, in the cloud, a lot easier to know where you stand. On-prem, a lot more challenges to figure out.
So we're going to explore this framework. And FinOps Framework, it's an operating framework and a cultural practice which has four distinct elements. One is that, of course, it maximizes the business value of the cloud. It provides data, timely data for informed decision making. It fosters collaboration between your finance, procurement, business stakeholders, engineering teams, and many teams who may be collaborating together. So it helps people take financial accountability. So we're going to explore this framework to see, can these capabilities be used on-prem?
So what we're going to do is we'll go through the capabilities in the framework and we'll consider them in three groups. So we'll start with those which are basically the same. We always did them on-prem. They're pretty much the same in the cloud. Then we'll look at those where, yeah, we had to do that on-prem, but the cloud is different. It's brought new challenges, different ways we have to think about things. And then finally, we'll look at the things which are net new. We've basically had to come up with dealing with these in the cloud. And what's interesting there is to look at, given what we now know and what we've learned in the cloud, actually, what can we apply back on-prem to kind of up our game on-prem? And we had a lot of interesting discussions between us debating what to put in which category.
Yes, so my knee-jerk reaction was like, no, FinOps is a cloud-centric practice, keep it on the cloud. But then as I had more discussions and I went with an open mindset, discussions with Jon really helped me change my mind, and now you'll see, and again, whatever we're showing is just between a meeting of these two minds. If two different minds meet, they will have a completely different outcome, but yesterday when we were networking and we were talking to people on the topic of our discussion, everybody had a resounding, of course you can use FinOps on-prem. And I was like, why didn't I think of that?
And I'm sure there will be a lot of different views in the room, and I'm sure some great stories as well where people have taken things they've learned from FinOps and applied back on-prem. So we're going to aim to leave lots of time for the Q&A. So yeah, love to hear what you think then. So let's dive in and first think about things that haven't changed very much. We always basically did the same thing on-prem. And the first one I wanted to talk about was allocations. So back to my days in equities trading. So at one point I was asked by the head of the trading desk, what's this $10,000 a month I get charged for this techie sounding system name that they'd never heard of? I guess it was a downturn and they were actually looking at their costs for a change. So what did I do? I got the data. Turns out every project had an allocation template. Some percentage of the costs was charged to other projects or to a profit center like the trading desk. So I got that data. I constructed the allocation tree. It had something like 100 paths between this system and my trader's desk, some with kind of 20 steps, 10% from this central logging system to this order management system, 7% from that, you get the idea. So I mapped out the allocation tree. I worked out where the percentages came from. Some were based on trading volume, some on revenue, all kinds of things. And eventually I understood it enough to digest it and to try and give a trader-sized explanation. And for those who've worked in trading, you know that means about 3 sentences before the trader gets distracted and goes off and does something else. So yeah, allocations kind of always been there. Yeah, tagging and things maybe help a little bit in the cloud, but fundamentally the same business problem that we're solving.
And if you were to ask me, this is by far my favoriteest child. allocations, because if you get the allocations right, I consider that to be as a foundational capability. Until JR showed that change is constant and that little bubbles that kept going around is making me rethink, like, is that truly the foundational capability? But in my case, for the practice that I've been doing, with this allocation, if they are done correctly, for example, on-prem, if you know how much maybe you allocated by your projects or departments or line of businesses or what have you, there has to be some way to allocate costs. Otherwise, it's just one big blurb, one ball of cost, and nobody knows, like, oh yeah, it's that monthly cost. But who's picking up the tab? Do you know where your money goes? So you'll see why it's my favorite. Because without these right allocations, that's the input for your reporting and analytics. It's not that reporting and analytics is suddenly very different over here in the on-prem world. We have reports that give us our system performance, our health, they monitor our health tools. You get alerts when your databases or servers are to capacity to whatever threshold you've set. So we do have monitoring systems and we do have reports that come out. But again, ask the right question. What is it that you're trying to get a report on? So that don't blame that the reporting was wrong, that you didn't get the information you needed about the cost. Ask yourselves, what can I input so that the report that gives me the output, which gives you the data insights, is the right data insight that you're looking for?
The other thing that I think about on reporting and analytics is, for a business user, they don't want to get one report that says, here's your cloud costs, and they get it on the 10th of the month, and it's structured in this way and sliced in this way, and then they get their on-prem report, and that comes on a different day and is set up differently. They just want to see what their costs are in a consistent way, to have a single pane of glass. And so that's something where having the same reporting format, maybe the same tools, maybe even the same team between on-prem and cloud costs can actually add a lot of business value. And we've seen that from some of our clients where gradually those teams have kind of converged, and the FinOps cloud-focused team has started to take on responsibility for some of the on-prem things.
Yep. So the next one is budgeting. It's not that budgeting doesn't exist in the on-prem world, right? We always set the budget. This capability allows you to set your budgets and then track spend according to the budgets that you've set. And of course, we make changes on the fly. Sometimes projects have to be canned, and sometimes projects have to be set up, which may not have been budgeted when you did your budget cycle. But this capability definitely exists during your on your on-prem operations also. And anything else you would like to add on budgeting?
No, I think that's good.
All right. Benchmarking is that capability which it sets a reference point. So again, if you knew your allocations that gave you the right reports, you would know what your monthly costs are. So then you are able to benchmark, and organizations do benchmarking both internally and externally. They may compare teams against the certain benchmark that they've established for their own organization, or it can be compared with a similar organization who provides, an organization that provides similar services. So it can be done both internally and externally, but without that reporting and analytics, you don't have the data to benchmark or to know what are my normal costs and what am I even targeting for. Because if you were looking at that blob of expense, which was not allocated accordingly, then all of these other capabilities become very difficult to execute.
Great, thank you, Maneesha. So let's move on to the second category. So these are the things that we always did something a bit like it on-prem, but it's changed quite a lot for cloud. We've had to worry about things in a different way.
And here's where we differ, because I was like, no, planning and estimation, forecasting, we've always had those. I've yet to see in 25 years an organization that said, I don't have any plan. You know what, let's just go in this year with zero plan. But for planning and estimation, to know what your potential future costs are, you just have to be able to know what are the inputs that went in to make up this cost. Again, goes back to my favorite child, the allocation. If you did not know what was it that was making up all of these costs, then your planning and budgeting would get challenging, and similarly for forecasting. Right now, I'm so excited about forecasting. I don't even have a financial background, but I am the forecasting expert in my organization because finance was pointing fingers and engineering was pointing fingers, and I just said, cut out the chase, let's just figure it out, take a look at what's going on, and forecasting became much easier once you understood what are the factors that go in your cost, that make up the cost.
And I think on those, I mean, absolutely, they've always existed. Yeah, we did plan and hopefully forecast on-prem, but it was a whole load easier. I mean, the scaling up and down that I talked about earlier. There's a great thing in the keynote this morning. I think it was the lady from Disney was speaking about how the forecasting model kind of broke when you started, for example, to optimize your cloud spend, because your model didn't know that was going to happen. And a lot of those challenges of kind of making it harder to forecast with the cloud than perhaps it was on-prem.
All right. Unit economics, this would be every C-suite leader's dream come true. Everybody wants to know, okay, unit economics tells you this was your cloud spend, and this is the value of your cloud spend. So we all want to know what is the value of my business investment, whether I made it in the cloud or whether I've kept it on the infrastructure on-prem. And again, if you did not know what are those little pieces that make up this cost, it's hard to justify what is the value you're getting out of this. A very good example was recently we were looking at our renewals for software licenses, and I was challenged that he said, okay, this licenses cost has gone up by 30%. What am I getting in return? How far is my dollar being stretched? And I was like, okay, can I get back to you after FinOps X? Because I need to think about it. But I think they need to challenge us, and we need to be thinking about how do I show the value that I bring to the cloud? For on-prem cost also.
The next one I want to talk about was licensing and SaaS. I mean, yeah, we've always had licensing on-prem. We've had Oracle. We've got VMware. Don't worry, I won't mention the B word to anybody who's kind of upset by that at the moment. And for a long time, we've had SaaS. But the cloud has introduced additional things we've got to worry about. You've got things like hybrid benefit. I can take my on-prem SQL Server licenses, and in certain situations, I can apply those to instances in the cloud. Or you've got the challenges that auto-scaling brings. You don't necessarily know how many licenses you're going to be running at any given point of time for something. And you've also got things like the marketplace. So people can potentially sign themselves up for additional SaaS services without a lot of the controls that you traditionally had. So yes, we've always had these, but it's, again, kind of become harder and new things to think about with the cloud. So we're on to our final category, and amazingly, we're doing pretty well on time here.
Yeah.
So, yeah, for me, what's of most interest here is the things which we've learned how to do, we've had to do in the cloud, and we've learned through FinOps how to do those. And now we can look at them and say, you know what, actually, I could apply that back on-prem, or in a lot of cases, somebody who benefits from them says, why aren't we doing this on-prem? Now, if we think about data ingestion, I mean, the cloud is fundamentally a data creator. I've got all my billing data, all my utilization, more than I can cope with. And for me, a lot of what we do in FinOps, at least behind the scenes, is kind of a big data problem. How do I consume and analyze all that data? Whereas on-prem, there's a lot less data, and what there wasn't remotely standardized. Typically, I'd have to ask some team for what I needed. They'd send me back a spreadsheet a week later, or half the time they'd come back and say, sorry, just don't have that data. But yeah, now people are seeing what's possible in the cloud, and they're starting to say, well, we need that for on-prem as well. An example, large client that we're working with, they're in the process of making sure that the utilization data for all their on-prem compute is in the same data lake as all the utilization data that they brought in for their cloud instances. Nobody thought they needed that until they had it for the cloud and started to realize the value. And so now people are saying, well, we need it on-prem as well.
I don't know if you were paying attention. He said the S word. He said spreadsheets. And you know how complicated spreadsheets can get. right? Each one has their own version, and each spreadsheet has like each person has their own version. Each team has different versions of those spreadsheets. And when they send out reports like, okay, here's a spend, you get 4 different spreadsheets. You get every spreadsheet with 25 different tabs, and there's just one single line. Current months, like on the 15th of every month or X date of every month, you get the spend reports, and then you're like, okay, what am I looking at? You know what, never mind. This can go back on the back burner, and then I'll worry about the spend later. But that's why I'm very scared of spreadsheets, because if we don't look at it, and when I started looking at those more closely, it's trying to put them into a single pane dashboard, and I was challenged, like, your dashboards are not right. It's like, it's coming from the spreadsheet that he just mentioned, and when they looked at those spreadsheets, it was something that, oh, somebody inserted a column, so everything shifted, but nobody looked at, like, okay, where is the source? And so then your source of truth is messed up. So spreadsheets is like very...
They're dangerous, but I would still say they're the greatest invention in the history of mankind, even beyond the wheel.
All right. So anomaly management, again, this has been very successful. If you knew what was the driving factors, what were the driving factors for the cost for your on-prem situation, you would know that your reports would tell you what the benchmarks are, and when your costs go up or down beyond a certain threshold, it's easy to catch those anomalies. Examples would be where your hardware breaks down. Nobody anticipated this, but it broke down. It cost you. There wasn't a maintenance contract because somebody didn't update that spreadsheet, which said that you've got to update your maintenance contract. And so these are the kind of anomalies that could get detected because you know that they go up or down. Or my favorite one is on your software licenses. I used to work with the SAP implementations, and no matter how many times SAP sent out the communication that we are no longer supporting version XYZ, nobody has time to pay attention because we're all doing our daily jobs. And then when that that software comes to end of license, everybody's like, what has happened? And who's going to pay for that extended cost? And those are the kind of anomalies, those are the kind of costs that throw off your benchmarks and they throw you off the grid. So, but it can be done. You just have to polish those spreadsheets a little better.
Architecting for the cloud, I'll skip over except to say, if you think about it more as architecting for cost management, which is kind of how JR referred to it this morning, then you can see how actually that kind of is relevant for on-prem, and perhaps historically when we've architected new systems on-prem, we've not really thought that much about it. Workload optimization. So this one's kind of interesting, and I'll try and give you the short version of this. I started off going on at length about this one. So on-prem, traditionally, you had bare metal. So you estimated what you were going to need. You, I don't know, took a month to get through the approvals process. It took 3 months for it to get racked. Finally, you had your shiny new kit, and it was yours. And now, whether you really used it or not, you're stuck with it. So there's not really any point in right-sizing. What am I going to do? I've got it. Maybe what you did is a new project came along and you squeezed it on those existing boxes because that avoided the 4 month delay. You could just use the hardware you had. But yeah, right-sizing as we know it in the cloud, we never really did. If you then think about VMs in the sense of VMware on-prem, I ask for a certain number of VMs with a certain number of cores. The central virtualization team decide, okay, yeah, we'll put them on these bare metal machines. They've managed having spare capacity for new requests and all that kind of thing. And great, I've got my VMs, but maybe I've been given 32 cores because that's what I asked for, and I'm only using 16. It's on the surface, well, great. Right-sizing as we know it in the cloud applies. Why wouldn't you just right-size on-prem as well? Free up those underused 16 cores, give them to somebody else. Except, and I think not everybody's always aware of this, virtualization technologies generally have an idea of oversubscription. So they look at what you've actually used in those VMs. You've been given 32 cores, but you've only been using 16. And if the administrators have configured it in a certain way, then it's actually going to say, okay, I'm only reserving you 16 cores, and if you ever need to go above that, sure, you can expand into this shared buffer capacity that other people can expand into as well. And so even with VMware, it's less common that that central virtualization team is going to have to hound people to right size like we have to in the cloud. Instead, they're just going to twiddle the dials and make sure that they're only given what they need anyway. So yeah, right sizing is kind of unique for the cloud. And by the way, something similar happens with storage as well. It's not compute, so some of the on-prem storage devices have similar sort of ideas. And even in the cloud, Kubernetes, you've got oversubscription as well, so one to think about when you're looking at right sizing there. Rate optimization, kind of cloud specific, so don't have a lot to say on that one.
Sustainability, favorite topic. And Vic over here is here to talk on sustainability, so I'm not going to steal his thunder. But sustainability on-prem is not new, right? When you run your data centers, you just run it like your own home. What would you do to make your home more energy efficient? For example, if you were in an older home, you replace all the windows, you upgrade your appliances to make them more energy efficient. So there are so many such small things that you can do. Invest in green IT practices. Make sure you have energy efficient hardware, software. If you can, consolidate your servers so that you consolidate your resources and you're not spending or creating more carbon footprint. There are so many more things you can do. And again, I think your session is at 3 o'clock today, right after this. So feel free to join his session. If you see Bindu we have a special interest group just on sustainability who takes into account for FinOps and sustainability in FinOps. So feel free to go to them too. Optimize your cooling systems. Apparently, the way the data centers are laid out, even that can help you reduce your cloud bill. And today, when everybody, everyone, even if you're on-prem, you're using Gen AI, and these GPUs, they generate a lot of electricity because they need a lot of capacity to run those algorithms. And so they generate a lot of carbon footprint, and you can use energy efficient systems. And what they said in the morning session too, report on it.
Yeah.
Report your metrics.
And on the reporting, I think that's an interesting angle on this as well is, yes, sustainability applies to on-prem, but on cloud, if what you need to do from a practical point of view is report on your carbon emissions, the data's not perfect, but you can typically get the data for the cloud, so you can produce your report. If it's your on-prem, you're kind of on your own. It's a whole load tougher. Nobody's going to tell you what your on-prem compute costs. It's down to how you've designed the data center and those things Maneesha talked about. So another important difference between the two.
Oh, and also if you want to move the needle, start procuring from vendors who are certified energy efficient vendors. Apparently they all publish reports and they do have a certification. I didn't know about it till I started researching on this topic.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Cool, so that's finished going through the items here. So a couple of closing remarks and then we'll hand over for Q&A and sort of experiences of you folks.
So frameworks, right? At the end of it, it's the framework, it's your system, it's those daily practices that you do that make it very useful for you to reach your goal. And we think the FinOps framework is your solution. It's the answer that can be applied for both, whether you're running your resources, hosting them on the cloud, or whether you host them on-prem. The frameworks, gives you a structure, it gives you, it helps you with your dependency mapping to know how do these components interact with each other. Otherwise, it's a free-for-all, like a hot potato. Nobody wants to take accountability because it's cost, and oh, that's finance. Finance says no, that's procurement. Procurement says no, that's IT, because they're the ones who are generating those costs. So with this framework, you get accountability embedded in it. And I think the RACI has been very, very useful to identify who's responsible, accountable, informed, or consulted. If you've done the RACI framework, it's very applicable even over here on the FinOps side. So I think this FinOps framework gives you like a roadmap, your guardrails, and it tells you the way you can navigate within this system.
I think also, for me, when I think about this, the framework, the foundation has brought us a common language to talk about these things, even if they always existed on-prem. We've now got terminology to use. Yeah. Also, I think about the community and the best practice sharing. On-prem, generally organizations were on their own. maybe you've got a bit of cross-fertilization. Somebody moves from one firm to another and takes some ideas with them. But generally, kind of, people had to make it up for themselves. With the foundation, we've obviously got events like this where people are sharing best practices. And so through that, it can only also help us improve on-prem, whether it be taking the ideas for cloud, applying them back, or who knows, maybe there's specific sort of on-prem best practices that will start getting shared through the foundation.
Yep.
So with that, yeah, over to you. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Maybe people have got places where they've taken things from the framework and applied them back on-prem, or maybe you disagree strongly with kind of how we've categorized anything. So I think, are we doing the throwy thing, whatever it's called? Yeah.
Okay. First, thank you all for...
All right. Thank you. Thank you.
And anyone who does have a question, we've got the question cube, which I'll throw to you. Not over 3 rows of people.
How did you guys, can you hear that?
Yep. Okay.
How did you guys open the discussion if there was a gap between the cloud teams and the on-prem teams? How did you open that discussion and proceed to unify?
Let's just talk about even within the cloud teams, there are so many differences, right? And now you're talking of now the cloud team and the on-prem team. I think it's people are people, no matter which teams you're on. And from some of the sessions that I've been through, what I've gathered is getting the information in front of the right people at the right time is important. And if you have the data, but if that data doesn't mean anything to this person, he's just going to discard that data completely because it is of no value. But when you align it with, okay, this is the business strategic direction, and these are the business objectives, and this is how we meet those business objectives, regardless of whether you host your applications on-prem or on the cloud, I think that's a discussion to be had.
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree with that. It's kind of linking it back to the business values. So, we should have one team that handles on-prem and cloud because it's obvious, isn't it? It isn't typically going to fly in most organizations, whereas, yeah, you know what, there's this business value because we get this unified report and we can do this or that, or look at this value that's been unlocked over here with this cloud data, getting the same on-prem would do this. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of definitely linking it back to the business
I get
value.
that even today. It's like, why should I care about cost? I'm an architect. I don't do cost. Cost is finance. And it's like, no, dude, you are responsible for the cost because you are creating that cost. And everybody needs to take that shared accountability. And that's why we think it's very applicable regardless of which team you're on.
For the data ingestion of on-prem data for your cloud costs versus the public cloud costs data, did you guys use a specific tool, or did you guys have to go back and refactor the whole on-prem billing data to make it ingestible into the public cloud billing data?
I mean, I think the first thing I'd say to that is have a think about whether you can plug it into the focus model. Do I get my brownie points for that? But no, seriously, I mean, it's kind of, if you've got a great setup with the cloud, then, I mean, probably what I'd be doing, is saying, okay, how can I get this same data model populated with the on-prem stuff I've got? It's not necessarily going to be able to have all the detail, and as I was saying earlier, some of the things like what are your fully loaded costs are going to be an evolution. Maybe this year you can't deal with the calling and the future data center costs, but maybe next year you can start adding those in and improving it. So I think it'd be a gradual thing.
We have a model where we get the data ingested from all the cloud service. We are multi-cloud, so we get the data from all cloud service providers, and we also have on-prem data. And so far, because of my mindset that, I do FinOps, I don't do on-prem, I did not even look at what data is coming in. But after this is over and I get back, that's one of my first things to do is to see what data is even ingested, because we have a common platform where we are ingesting the data. But I just don't know what data we're ingesting yet.
So on that topic, actually, my question is, how do you help bridge the gap between when providing reports up to like leadership, finance, and procurement to get them involved when comparing the on-prem to cloud. And you discussed in an earlier slide on how in some cases the data doesn't really match up CapEx versus OpEx. So how do you bridge the gap in those conversations?
And I think you had some interesting experience there, Maneesha, with kind of helping people when the cloud came in, not have this jolt of a new language and a new way of thinking, but you kind of mapped things back to the on-prem way of thinking.
So I did the reverse way, that I took, nobody knew how to do forecasting, so I was getting beat up by finance, questioning me, why are your cloud costs still going up? And I would take those reports to my boss, and he would just throw it out of the window, like, your cost allocations are all wrong because you're allocating costs to projects that have been sunset. So I go back to the finance team, like, why are we allocating here? Oh, ask this team because they do that. I go back to them, why are we doing this? Till it became very clear that that spreadsheet, again, was not revisited in the last 3 years. So when I joined the team and I had to learn it all over again, I realized that, okay, we are allocating it incorrectly, got the allocations correct, and now to get them to understand how to do forecasting, I use the same model and the look and the feel. It's a spreadsheet look and feel, but that's what they were used to looking at, and I replicated that for the cloud cost. So instead of people who are allocated to projects, now I'm just listing the projects and saying these are your monthly costs according to these projects, because now I have my right allocations. So I use the same framework to help them bridge the gap between what they did not know. So what they knew was helping them to what they did not know, which is the new normal. And that has helped the team significantly adopt forecasting as just embracing forecasting.
And I think also it's back to what's the business objective. I mean, there's a reason why somebody's asking to have both the cloud and the on-prem costs together. Well, what are they trying to do? What's the right information for the report to show? And from that, okay, how do I map on-prem and cloud to that? And often it'll be a starting small. Maybe I can get the high-level reports lining up, but if you want to drill into more detail, yeah, you're going to have to deal with the fact that it's different lower down. You don't necessarily try and solve the whole problem, the whole gory detail on day one. You meant to throw it.
All right. So, do you have any stories about where maybe you had this data, all this information, and something moved from on-prem to the cloud? Did that data match up? Was there a comparison? Were you able to say it made more sense to do this here or versus to do it there in hindsight and looking backwards?
I think so many things in that. That's probably a whole session in its own right. I mean, a couple I would think about there. First is back to my VMware oversubscription. Firstly, you often find people will say, oh, I've got 32 cores on the VMware VM, so let me get 32 cores on the cloud, except you're probably not paying for all 32 on-prem. You are going to pay for all 32 on the cloud, and guess what? You get there and you've got to right size. So looking at actual utilization when you're deciding how to migrate. So it's one thing to think about. And I think the fully loaded costs, again, I mean, to get the kind of comparison you're talking about, I suspect a lot of organizations would actually struggle to do an apples for apples comparison. It cost me this to run on-prem. Yeah, but that was just your hardware cost. That wasn't your fully loaded cost, whereas your cloud is at least fully loaded. So I think it's also knowing kind of what actually is this number for on-prem, what does it mean, and how much of a grain of salt do I need to take it with? I mean, I think it's one of the hardest things really is that how do you know, is this one going to be cheaper or more expensive if I move it to the cloud? And then, I mean, that's the whole what workloads run where, the kind of, is it going to scale? So many times people say, oh, we'll move it to the cloud and then it can auto-scale and it will be great. And then you look at it and 2 years later, the auto-scaling group's got a fixed size. It's never scaled. Yeah, it's a very challenging area.
And I think this goes back to your question during the meetup too. How do we know what is the cloud cost going to be Is it safer for me to just stay where I am or go to the cloud and I just don't know what the costs are going to be? But also when you're on-prem, those shared resources, those databases, those servers, the data centers, they're shared across so many projects. It's for everyone to use. Versus over here on the cloud, it's specific to where you are. So I think that comparison would be hard to come through. All right.
Maneesha, thank you so much again.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Check out more FinOps X 2024 content on our YouTube channel on the 2024 playlist. Support our channel by liking, subscribing, clicking the notification bell, and by leaving comments and questions for our speakers. We appreciate your support.